You are listening to the Horse Radio Network, part of the Equine Network family.
Good morning. This is Ashley Winch in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and you're listening to Horses in the Morning on Horse Radio Network, episode 3680 for April 29th. Good morning, Horse World. We have a special treat in store for you today. We thought it'd be fun to highlight one of our shows on the network, a newer one at that, My Senior Horse by Mars. Join us as Kimberly Brown sits down with Dr. Pat Harris to talk all about the top scientific breakthroughs for senior horses. And don't forget to like and subscribe to My Senior Horse. Now, let's get on with the show.
Welcome to the new My Senior Horse podcast. This is where people who own, manage, and love senior horses, donkeys, and mules come to share our passion and to learn more about caring for our senior equids. I'm your host, Kim Brown, editorial director of My Senior Horse. We're pleased to launch the global My Senior Horse brand in partnership with Linda Mars and Mars Horse Care. The My Senior Horse brand will include this bi-weekly podcast, the myseniorhorse.com website, social medias, videos, Ask the Expert opportunities, and many other content elements and platforms. Our mission is to educate and assist owners and managers of horses, donkeys, and mules that are 15 years of age or older to support the health and welfare of senior equids. We'll cover topics that range from caring for competitive seniors to retired seniors enjoying their golden years. We'll bring you the latest research on the health and wellness of senior equids, as well as day-to-day management tips and some fun stuff about senior equids. Today, we welcome Dr. Pat Harris. She's a veterinarian and a specialist in equine veterinary clinical nutrition. Dr. Harris is the director of science at Mars Horse Care. She's head of Waltham Equine Studies Group at the Waltham Pet Care Science Institute, and she is a scientific advisor to Mars Equestrian. Thank you for joining us today, Dr. Harris, to talk about some outstanding research that's been done in senior equids.
Thank you, Kim, for that very kind introduction. And I'm really honoured to be involved in this, one of the first podcasts for My Senior Horse, as I have spent much of the last 30 years working to help to improve the care and in particular the nutrition of older horses, whilst also looking after my own older horses and advising on the care of many others.
Well, and we're so excited to have someone of your caliber and to be working with the Mars Group and Linda Mars, because this is really a passion project for a lot of us. So let's get right into it, because I know our audience wants to know, what do you consider the top 3 scientific breakthroughs for senior horse care?
Wow, well, I'm glad you asked for my top 3, as I'm sure that these, and in particular, the order of the top 3 will depend on who you ask. And also, I have to be honest, Kim, I'm going to cheat a bit here, as I think there have been a great number of advances recently.
Yeah,
and what I'm
right.
going to do, yes, is to include several aspects within each general breakthrough area. And I think I've chosen them in particular because I've also been fortunate to be involved in research in all of these 3 areas, which perhaps explains my choices. So, for me, number 1 is our improvements in general management and care that have occurred recently, as I think these are really of practical relevance to all of us involved in looking after older horses. So for me in particular, of course, there have been a number of advances in our nutritional knowledge and therefore the advice we can give, which really ranges from the use of vegetable oils and highly digestible fibres to how much starch and sugar we should feed older horses. And those that may or may not have insulin dysregulation, a really important condition we've only really understood recently. But I think there are other things. I think these have led to an increased availability and use of balancers, and also pre-prepared mashes, which can be so useful for our senior horses. But as well, when we look at this improvements in general management and care, I think there have also been advances in dental care, vaccination, and anthelmintic management. So really, number 1 is all around how we care and manage for these horses. And I look forward to hearing more about that as we go along. So my number 2 is all around our better understanding of, as well as the early detection and management of the key metabolic diseases in senior horses. Yeah. And I think this includes obesity, laminitis, and of course, PPID, equine Cushing's. And as I mentioned before, I think we always forget, and we often forget, that it's actually only relatively recently that we've understood the importance of insulin in many laminitic cases. And this has opened up a whole new area of research, not only with respect to nutritional management, but risk prediction, and importantly, veterinary management. So I think this is key. And leading on from this is my third area. And I think it's all around the improvements in veterinary diagnosis and treatment of several key conditions which do occur and affect our senior horses. And this would be around the arthritis and the gastrointestinal health, such as ulcers. And again, I'm looking forward to hearing and reading about more of those advances.
Well, those are an amazing 3. And as owners of senior horses, we really appreciate all the research that's been done on those. But I want to ask you, what, in your opinion, why are these 3 topics, these 3 areas of research so important?
Well, I think there are several reasons for that. I think because you've just highlighted, for all of us that keep horses, we know that these are the areas that affect us and our horses. But I think that is based on our own opinion. And I think the importance of these 3 areas was actually highlighted to me and to all of us in the results of a survey that was done of nearly 3,000 owners of senior horses, those we counted as over 15 years of age, in the USA. And this survey was undertaken in collaboration with Waltham, but was led by Elisa Herbst and Amanda Adams from the University of Kentucky.
Yeah.
And I think it is really exciting because the first 2 parts have or will hopefully be published this year. And therefore, I am sure you'll hear more detail. But just to give a very snapshot, this study showed that most horses were retired from work or retired completely between 15 to 24 years of age, showing the importance of that 15-year-old. And most of them were retired with health problems being cited as the main reason for their retirement. So going back to my 3 areas, this is why it's so important. And only about a third of the horses in that present survey were reported to be free of clinical signs or signs of declined health at the time of the survey. It's great that a third of them were, but it does mean 2/3 weren't. And the most common owner-reported veterinary diagnosed condition present at the time of the survey was osteoarthritis, showing the importance of the work that's going on in that. But the second most common condition was dental disorders. But also PPID and laminitis were also commonly reported, not surprisingly, as being the issues in these horses. So I think that survey really highlights the importance of the 3 areas that I mentioned.
Yeah, and as all of us who are listening who love the senior horses and own and manage them, I mean, this really hits home for all of us. So as we're going along, I mean, this is one of the things that the Mars group and Linda and Dr. Harris and all of us that are involved, we have some amazing people. The people she talked about doing this research are on our board for the My Senior Horse. So it is wonderful that people globally have gathered together to help us get this information out and learn more about our senior horses. I know that you and I have worked together a lot in the past, Dr. Harris, on other things. Tell our audience a little about your own work.
Thank you. And yes, just to add to what you've just said, I think the importance of My Senior Horse is a lot of this work we're publishing in veterinary journals. And this is a great to be able to share it with the people who are actually caring and their veterinarians as well. So I think that's really important. On a personal about my own work, I'm really fortunate and privileged, as you say, to have been able to collaborate with colleagues around the world on the various aspects of feeding and managing the older horse, with and without insulin dysregulation and with and without PPID. And it's enabled us to explore aspects that will pick up going forward into digestibility, the microbiome, insulin dynamics, and transport stress. But I thought, whilst we will probably pick up more detail, I'd just give a few highlights just to tempt everyone and let people know the kind of things. And going back a few years, one of the first questions we explored was the idea based on some original work undertaken now many years ago that suggested older horses required increased intakes of protein due to reduced digestibility. And certainly the authors themselves actually suggested that the studies might have been influenced by the animals involved having unknown anthelmintic programs during their lives, which really highlights again the importance of a good anthelmintic program and the advances we are having on not only when to do it and how to do it and to try and reduce resistance. But going back to my work, together with colleagues at the University of Michigan, we compared a group of healthy older horses and compared them with younger horses. And in this study, we found no difference in protein or energy digestion, at least when they were being fed sufficient forage of an appropriate quality. But protein quality remains key. And we've shown, as have others, that the actual requirements of the protein, i.e. the amino acids, will depend on the individual and the workload. And so it is really important to make sure that you're looking at the amount of protein you're feeding, but also what constitutes that protein. So even though we didn't find a difference, I still recommend that protein is really important to consider in our older animals. And I really look at the quality and how much of the amino acids I'm feeding. And then in those particular studies, and other studies where we combined with the University of Liverpool and Mississippi State and Aberystwyth, we looked at the fecal bacteria. And interestingly, we found a reduction in the diversity of the microbiome in older horses, but not older ponies of similar age. And this might possibly be linked with postulated differences in longevity between some horses and ponies, i.e., ponies at the same age of the horses may be in their physiology and their microbiome not effectively as old as horses. Interesting. Needs some further work, but certainly of interest. But if we go back to our nutrition requirements, we also showed that there was no effect on age on the digestibility of the macro and micro and minerals, certainly in healthy animals. But as far as vitamins are concerned, we showed with the University of Kentucky that being positive for PPID was negatively associated with circulating vitamin B12 concentrations. And we also showed that even though these animals were being fed recommended NRC levels of vitamins, giving additional vitamin supplementation of older animals may help improve vitamin status. Again, oversupplementation is not necessarily, but making sure we don't forget to provide adequate amounts is so important. And I know we'll pick this up in some of our feeding.
Mars Equestrian, a sponsorship division of Mars Incorporated, is dedicated to highlighting the Mars brands such as Buckeye Nutrition, Spillers, Antec Diagnostics, Sound Imaging, Royal Canin, Pedigree, Nutro, and many more in the equestrian world. Whether it's through nutrition, veterinary care, or education, our purpose is to create a better world for horses, pets, and the people who love them.
And then I think more recently, one of our main recommendations is to restrict the non-structural carbohydrate. And by that, I mean starch and sugars and fructose content of older animals, especially if they've got insulin dysregulation. And I'd really like to take this opportunity just to explain to people a little bit why that's important, because I think it's some of the more recent work.
Right.
And it started with the initial work at that University of Michigan, where we looked at the effect of feeding fiber, starch, and oil-rich diets on the insulin response to feeding a standardized meal. And the standardized meal was just a high-starch diet. And what it showed is that older animals tended to have a more pronounced insulin response to that high sugar and starch diet.
Yeah.
And if we're trying to reduce that because we're trying to reduce the risk of laminitis, feeding rations that provided less than a certain amount of NSC resulted in a much lower insulin response in this study. So it was normal, healthy animals. We came up with an idea of a starting threshold. Every horse is different. Every horse is an individual, but it gives us a guide. We then went on, and this is the work that I am absolutely certain we'll hear more about, because this is work that was done with Erica Macon and Amanda Adams, again from the University of Kentucky, because this work suggested that if you've got an insulin dysregulated animal, especially if they're severely, we need even lower levels, and we might need to monitor that individual animal on its individual feed and forage.
Right. I mean, some of this research, again, as someone who has owned horses and has honestly made mistakes because we didn't know. We're just learning some of this. And that's one reason we wanted this My Senior Horses to be a clearinghouse for global owners of horses, donkeys, and mules. I mean, that's the idea. And some of what you're talking about, we will delve into in the website. We'll explain it more. I mean, this is a podcast, so we can't get too in depth. But we will have Dr. Harris back to talk about some of these in the future, because I know some of these topics I am so interested in. So, Dr. Harris, in the time that we have, do you have any other comments or topics you would like to mention?
As you said, there's so much, and I hope we can explore it in more detail. And please come back to look at the website and come back to listen so that we can explain a bit more of what we're discussing here. I'm just giving a few highlights. I think a few others that people might be interested in is some work we've done on the laminitis and obesity, which is really also very valuable for the senior horse, as I said, and it's very close to my heart. And I think some of them are quite interesting in that, for example, a while ago with colleagues from the University of Bristol, we showed that the more dominant animals were more likely to become obese. But we didn't know whether that was cause or effect. And we went on, and actually later work by us and our collaborators showed that it was not necessarily dominance that makes some horses more likely to put on weight. But perhaps, and this is sort of where science meets practicality,
right?
Not surprisingly, those most likely to gain weight were those that tended to eat more and were less distracted by other animals.
Yeah.
But it's useful to know that, and it won't again apply to all animals, but it might be useful when you're trying to manage some of these animals. And when we're talking about management, something that we've done a lot has been looking at grazing muzzles. Mm-hmm. And we found that they could reduce grass intake by an average of around 80% in some of our studies in ponies turned out for 3 hours. And that was regardless of the season. And it was in a number of studies we carried out with Dr. Annette Longland. We went on and we confirmed the potential value of using well-fitting, and I would emphasize they have to be well-fitting. Yeah. The horse has to be adapted to them, grazing muzzles. And we looked at this as part of weight management programs, both in the US and the UK. But I think, again, I'm going to leave, it is really important to monitor the use of these animals, monitor weight, don't rely on them. And there is a risk that if you take the muzzles off, there is a risk of them just eating more. So you have to plan the use as part of your weight management. And, we will come to some of the tips of using grazing muzzles, because in our hands, it depends on the length of the grass. And there are lots of other factors that I think hopefully people might be interested to hear.
And I'm going to be one of those, because I have a donkey, which, saying you have an obese donkey is kind of, redundant. But, she has lost quite a few pounds now, and we have a nice fitting muzzle as part of her other plan of exercise and nutrition. So, but we're learning more about this, and it's just, how do we do this to keep these animals alive and healthy longer and enjoying their lives? Absolutely. So anything else, Dr. Harris? You and I could talk all day. We could just pick a topic. We've got muscle mass and senior horses and PPID. There's so much that we want to talk about and share with everyone.
Yes, one more, but I would say about the donkey, and I think you're so right. Donkeys, they're not small horses or ponies. They're similar. We all have very similar. It's the same similarities in nutrition between a human, a dog, and a horse. But the nuances and the amounts and the types of feedstuffs that are appropriate are so different. And I think that is such an important point, that we're not just talking about horses and ponies. We need to think of donkeys, and they are different. So I think that's a really good point. I think a couple of other comments would be about some work that we did with colleagues from the Royal Veterinary College in the UK. I think this is important because it's the very first prospective study, i.e. we took animals that had no history of laminitis and we monitored them over the next few years to try and find if we could predict the risk of laminitis in animals. And we've recently published some of this work. And the first study we did showed that a high concentration of insulin and a low concentration of adiponectin were able to predict a greater risk. And then more recently, we've done some work with Ed Knowles and again, colleagues of the RVC. And in this study, which again was a prospective study, we categorized ponies as either low, medium, or high risk of going on to develop laminitis by measuring the concentration of insulin in their blood pre and post, a test that is used to identify if they have insulin dysregulation, i.e. an oral sugar test. And I think there are some really key findings here in that whilst animals with a low level of insulin in their blood can still develop laminitis, and this is really important, they are still able under certain circumstances, but they were much less likely to suffer. So they have a lower risk, but it's not no risk. But it also showed that those that had a higher level, and especially very high levels, tended to have a higher risk. They were more at risk.
Yeah.
But the other important that we've just recently published as well showed that you can't rely on using their body condition score to predict, i.e. thin animals can also have a problem, although those that are more obese are more likely to be insulin dysregulating. You cannot use it, and you need to test.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so I think these are some really good practical papers and studies that we've done in the last few years.
And I know our audience is like me and going, but I want to know more. I want to know more. And we will. This is why we wanted to have this global resource center to try and take this information out so we can use it and learn more about it. And Dr. Harris has been a huge driving force behind this, and we really appreciate all of her work. And you all will never know how much she has done to get us started on this, but we do appreciate it. And we really appreciate you coming on today. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Harris.
Thank you.
And I want to invite all of our listeners to make sure and tell your friends about this My Senior Horse podcast, because we want to be able to share this information with all of our friends who have senior equids. And we encourage you to go on to the website. It's myseniorhorse.com and sign up to be able to get information from My Senior Horse. We'll bring it to your inbox and say, here's some of the latest things that we have. And if you have any comments or suggestions about senior horses, donkeys, or mules, or ponies that you would like to have discussed on this podcast or delved into for the content of the My Senior Horse website, you can send an email to me at kbrown, that's the letter K Brown, at equinenetwork.com. Thanks for joining us today. Make sure and take care of yourselves and your senior equids.